The day one. Woman's tired feet changed everything. Rosa Parks and what really happened on that bus. There's a story about Rosa Parks that most people think they know. They'll tell you she was just a tired seamstress who refused to give up her seat on a bus one day in Montgomery, Alabama. And that spontaneous act of defiance sparked the civil rights movement. But if you were a young black person living through that time, if you grew up riding segregated buses and watching your parents navigate the daily humiliations of Jim Crow, you know the real story was so much deeper, so much more complicated, and so much more powerful than that simple version they taught in schools. Rosa Parks wasn't just tired that day in December 1955. She was tired of a lifetime of degradation, tired of a system designed to break her spirit. And most importantly, she was a trained activist who made a calculated decision that would change the course of American history. Do you remember what it felt like to ride those segregated buses? If you grew up black in the South during the 1940s and 50s, you knew the rules before you could even read the signs. You entered through the front door to pay your fare. Then you had to get off and walk around to the back door to enter the colored section. Sometimes the bus driver would pull off before you could get back on, taking your money and leaving you standing on the street. You knew that the first 10 rows were reserved for white passengers. Even if they were empty and you were standing in the aisle, you knew that if the white section filled up, the bus driver could order you to give up your seat and move further back. You knew that talking back, hesitating, or showing any sign of resistance could get you arrested, beaten, or worse. Rosa Parks knew all of this too. She had been riding those Montgomery buses for years, watching the injustice unfold every single day. She had been thrown off buses before for refusing to comply with drivers who treated black passengers like animals. She knew James Blake, the bus driver who would arrest her that December evening because he had thrown her off his bus 12 years earlier. She had avoided his bus route ever since, but on December 1st, 1955, fate put her on his bus one more time, and this time she was ready. What most people don't know is that Rosa Parks was already deeply involved in civil rights work long before that famous day. She was the secretary of the Montgomery chapter of the NAACP. She had attended workshops on civil disobedience and nonviolent resistance at the Highlander Folk School in Tennessee. She had been investigating cases of sexual violence against black women for years, documenting the stories that newspapers refused to print and police refused to investigate. Rosa Parks was not a meek, quiet woman who accidentally became a hero. She was a trained, committed activist who understood exactly what she was doing when she kept her seat that day. Think about the courage that took. Rosa Parks was sitting in the colored section of the bus, in a seat she had every right to occupy under Montgomery's segregation laws. But when white passengers boarded and filled up the white section, the driver ordered the entire row of black passengers to stand so one white man could sit down. 3 other black passengers moved. Rosa Parks stayed seated. She looked that bus driver in the eye and said no. Not rudely, not loudly, just firmly and quietly. No. Can you imagine the electricity that must have run through that bus in that moment? The other black passengers who had just stood up, watching this small, dignified woman refuse an order they had all obeyed countless times before. The white passengers, shocked that a black woman would dare to disobey. The bus driver, James Blake, his authority challenged in front of everyone. And Rosa Parks herself, knowing that this moment could cost her everything, her job, her safety, possibly her life, but choosing to hold her ground anyway. When the police came to arrest her, Rosa Parks did not resist. She let them put handcuffs on her and take her to jail. But in her quiet refusal, In her dignified resistance, she had done something that would ripple out through Montgomery, through the South, through the entire nation. She had shown that one person, armed with nothing but conviction and courage, could say no to injustice and mean it. If you were young and black in Montgomery in December 1955, the news of Rosa Parks' arrest spread through the community like wildfire. People talked about it in beauty shops and barbershops, in churches and schools, on street corners and in living rooms. Everyone knew Miss Rosa Parks. She was respected, dignified, active in the church and community. If they could arrest her for simply sitting in a seat she had paid for, then none of them were safe. The anger and frustration that had been building for generations found focus in that one act of arrest. The Women's Political Council, led by Joanne Robinson, stayed up all night mimeographing thousands of flyers calling for a one-day bus boycott. They distributed them to black schools, churches, and businesses across Montgomery. The message was simple. On Monday, December 5th, don't ride the bus. Walk, carpool, take a taxi, but don't ride the bus. It was time to show Montgomery that black people's dignity and dollars mattered. Do you remember what it felt like when your community came together like that? When everyone, young and old, rich and poor, educated and uneducated, stood united for a common cause. The Montgomery bus boycott wasn't just about Rosa Parks. It was about every black person who had ever been humiliated on those buses. Every mother who had to stand with groceries while empty seats sat reserved for white passengers who might never come. Every father who had to swallow his rage and move to the back. Every child who learned too young what it meant to be treated as less than human. On that first day of the boycott, the buses rolled through Montgomery's black neighborhoods, nearly empty. The sight of those empty buses must have been something to see. Black domestic workers who had ridden the bus to white neighborhoods for decades walked instead. Some of them elderly women with swollen feet and aching backs. Students walked to school in groups, some traveling miles in the cold. People who owned cars organized carpools, picking up strangers and neighbors, and anyone who needed a ride. The black taxi drivers charged just 10 cents, the same price as bus fare, so everyone could afford transportation. The boycott that was supposed to last one day stretched into a week, then a month. Than months. The city tried everything to break it. They arrested carpool drivers for minor traffic violations. They threatened taxi drivers with license suspension. They tried to intimidate leaders with harassment and violence. But the people of Montgomery held strong. They were tired of being tired, as one elderly woman famously said when offered a ride. Her feet might be tired, but her soul was rested. A young minister named Martin Luther King Jr., new to Montgomery and to leadership, emerged as the spokesman for the boycott. But the real strength of the movement came from ordinary people, the domestics and laborers, the teachers and shopkeepers, the students and elders who walked those streets day after day, month after month, for 381 days. They walked in rain and heat, through winter cold and summer storms. They walked until the Supreme Court ruled that bus segregation was unconstitutional. They walked until they won. If you were a young black person watching all this unfold, it changed something fundamental in how you saw the world and your place in it. You saw that change was possible. You saw that ordinary people had power when they stood together. You saw that the system that seemed so permanent and unchangeable could be challenged and defeated. You saw your parents and grandparents, your teachers and neighbors, people you had always known as careful and cautious, transform into warriors for justice. Rosa Parks paid a heavy price for her courage. She lost her job at the department store where she worked as a seamstress. She received death threats that forced her to move carefully and carefully. The stress and danger took a toll on her health and her family. Eventually, she and her husband Raymond had to leave Montgomery altogether, moving to Detroit to find work and some measure of safety. The city she had helped transform could not protect her from the hatred of those who opposed change. But what Rosa Parks started could not be stopped. The Montgomery bus boycott became a template for nonviolent resistance that would be used again and again throughout the civil rights movement. It showed that economic pressure could force change when moral appeals failed. It demonstrated that ordinary people, armed with nothing but determination and unity, could challenge and defeat unjust systems. It trained a generation of activists in the tactics and strategies they would use in the battles to come. For young Black women in particular, Rosa Parks became a powerful symbol of quiet strength and dignified resistance. She showed that you didn't have to be loud or aggressive to be revolutionary. You didn't have to be a man to be a leader. You didn't have to have a college education or a position of authority to make a difference. You just had to have courage, conviction, and commitment to justice. Rosa Parks, a 42-year-old seamstress with a high school education, had faced down the entire structure of white supremacy and won. Think about what the buses meant to Black communities in southern cities during segregation. For many Black people, especially domestic workers, the bus was the only way to get to work. They didn't own cars. They lived in neighborhoods far from the white areas where they worked as maids and cooks and nannies and laborers. The bus was essential to their survival, yet every time they boarded, they were reminded of their supposed inferiority. Every ride was a lesson in humiliation. The bus was both a necessity and a daily assault on dignity. White bus drivers had almost unlimited power over Black passengers. They could make you pay at the front and then drive off before you could board from the back. They could order you to give up your seat on a whim. They could curse at you, threaten you, call you racial slurs, and there was nothing you could do about it. Some drivers carried guns. All of them had the backing of the law and the white power structure. Complaining could get you arrested or worse. So most Black people endured in silence, swallowing their rage and humiliation because they had no choice. But Rosa Parks and the people of Montgomery showed that there was always a choice. It might be a hard choice, a costly choice, a dangerous choice, but it was a choice nonetheless. They could endure, or they could resist. They could accept degradation, or they could demand dignity. They chose resistance. They chose dignity. And in choosing, they changed the world. The young people who watched the Montgomery bus boycott learned lessons they would carry with them into the struggles ahead. They learned that change required sacrifice. The people who walked those miles every day for over a year sacrificed their comfort, their time, their energy. Some sacrificed their jobs or their safety, but they were willing to pay that price for freedom. They learned that unity was essential. If even a small percentage of Black people had broken the boycott and ridden the buses, it would have failed. But the community held together, supporting each other through the long months of struggle. They learned that nonviolence could be a powerful weapon. When the opposition turned to violence, bombing houses and churches, threatening and attacking boycott leaders, the movement refused to respond in kind. They understood that maintaining the moral high ground was crucial to winning broader support and ultimately achieving their goals. They learned that leadership could come from unexpected places. Rosa Parks was not a preacher or a politician. Martin Luther King was young and relatively unknown. Joanne Robinson was a college professor who worked behind the scenes. The boycott succeeded because ordinary people stepped up to lead in whatever way they could. Did your family participate in boycotts or protests inspired by Montgomery? Did your parents or grandparents tell you stories about those days, about the hope and fear and determination that filled Black communities across the South? The Montgomery bus boycott sent a message that traveled far beyond Alabama. Black people in other cities saw what Montgomery had accomplished and began organizing their own campaigns against segregation. Students in places like Greensboro, North Carolina, would soon sit down at whites-only lunch counters, inspired by the same spirit of nonviolent resistance. Freedom riders would board buses heading south, challenging segregation in interstate transportation. Rosa Parks lived another 50 years after that December day on the bus, long enough to see the civil rights movement achieve victories she might not have imagined possible. She saw the Civil Rights Act of 1964 outlaw segregation in public accommodations. She saw the Voting Rights Act of 1965 protect Black people's right to vote. She saw Black mayors and congresspeople and senators elected across the South. She saw a Black president take office, but she also saw how much work remained, how racism adapted and persisted in new forms, how the struggle for justice was ongoing and perhaps never ending. In her later years, Rosa Parks was often celebrated as the mother of the civil rights movement, a title she accepted with characteristic grace and humility. But she insisted that people remember the full story, not the simplified version that made it seem like one woman's spontaneous act changed everything. She wanted people to know about the decades of organizing and activism that came before her arrest. She wanted them to remember all the other people who had resisted bus segregation and paid a price for it. She wanted them to understand that movements for justice required many people playing many different roles over many years. She wanted young people especially to understand that they had power and responsibility. In speeches and interviews, she encouraged young people to learn their history, to understand the struggles that came before them, to find their own ways to fight injustice. She told them that education was crucial, that knowing your rights and your history was the foundation of effective activism. She told them to vote, to organize, to speak up, to never accept injustice as inevitable or unchangeable. What would Rosa Parks think if she could see the world today? Would she be encouraged by the progress that's been made, or discouraged by how far we still have to go? Would she recognize the tactics and strategies of today's movements for racial justice as descendants of the boycott she helped spark? Would she be surprised by anything? Or would she have expected that the struggle would continue generation after generation? The truth is, Rosa Parks understood from the beginning that her act of resistance was not an ending, but a beginning. She knew that refusing to give up her seat was just one small battle in a much longer war. She knew that defeating bus segregation in Montgomery would not eliminate racism or guarantee equality. She knew that every generation would have to fight its own battles, that vigilance and activism were the price of freedom, that justice was not something you won once and kept forever, but something you had to defend and expand continuously. For the young Black people of the 1950s and 60s who witnessed Rosa Parks's courage and the Montgomery bus boycott, the lessons were clear and powerful. You didn't have to be special or extraordinary to make a difference. You just had to be willing to stand up, or in Rosa's case, stay seated, for what was right. You had to be willing to endure discomfort and danger and criticism. You had to be willing to work with others, to sacrifice personal convenience for collective good, to stay committed even when success seemed far away. Those young people carried those lessons forward into lunch counter sit-ins and freedom rides, into voter registration drives and school desegregation battles, into anti-poverty campaigns and fights for fair housing. They became the leaders and organizers and foot soldiers of the civil rights movement, inspired by the example of a seamstress who said no to injustice on a Montgomery bus. And when they grew older and became parents and grandparents themselves, they told their children and grandchildren about Rosa Parks. They told them that one person's courage could light a fire that would spread far and wide. They told them that ordinary people had extraordinary power when they stood together. They told them that the fight for justice was hard and long and never truly finished, but it was the most important work anyone could do. Rosa Parks showed young Black people that dignity was not something white society could give or take away. It was something you claimed for yourself and defended with your actions. Every time she refused to move to the back of the bus, every time she walked miles rather than accept degradation, every time she stood up for her rights and the rights of her community, she was claiming her dignity and helping others claim theirs. The image of Rosa Parks sitting calmly on that bus, refusing to move, became one of the most powerful symbols of the civil rights movement. It represented the quiet strength of Black women who had been the backbone of resistance for generations. It represented the power of nonviolent resistance to expose and challenge injustice. Represented the moment when enough was finally enough, when patience and endurance gave way to defiance and demand. But Rosa Parks would want us to remember that she was not alone. She would want us to honor the thousands of people who walked during the boycott, the leaders like E.D. Nixon and Joanne Robinson who organized it, the young minister Martin Luther King Jr. who found his voice and calling through it, the countless others who contributed in ways large and small. She would want us to remember that movements are built by communities, not individuals, that lasting change requires collective action sustained over time. For young Black people today who are still fighting battles against racism and injustice, Rosa Parks' story offers both inspiration and instruction. It shows that courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite fear. It shows that preparation and training matter, that Rosa's effectiveness as an activist came partly from her years of study and organizing before that December day. It shows that timing matters, that sometimes the right person doing the right thing at the right moment can catalyze change in ways that might not have been possible earlier or later. Most importantly, Rosa Parks' story shows that resistance is always possible. No matter how powerful the system of oppression, no matter how entrenched the injustice, people always have the power to say no. That no might come at a cost. It might require sacrifice. It might take time to bear fruit, but it is always possible, and it always matters. When Rosa Parks died in 2005 at the age of 92, she became the first woman to lie in honor in the U.S. Capitol Rotunda. Thousands of people filed past her casket to pay their respects, but the real memorial to Rosa Parks is not in ceremonies or monuments. It's in every person who refuses to accept injustice, who stands up for what's right even when it's hard, who joins with others to demand the dignity and equality that should be every person's birthright. If you were there during those days, if you remember when Rosa Parks' arrest electrified the Black community and sparked a movement that would transform America, you carry that history in your bones. You remember the hope and the fear, the exhaustion and the exhilaration, the long walk toward freedom. And if you're young and learning this history for the first time, understand that you're part of the same ongoing story. The details may change, but the struggle continues. The tactics may evolve, but the goal remains the same: justice, equality, dignity for all people. Rosa Parks took her seat and refused to move. And in that simple act of defiance, she helped move a nation. She showed that the arc of the moral universe might be long, but people of courage and conviction could help bend it toward justice. She proved that ordinary people could do extraordinary things. She reminded us all that freedom is not free, that it requires struggle and sacrifice, but that it is always, always worth fighting for. Do you remember where you were when you first heard about Rosa Parks? Did anyone in your family participate in the Montgomery bus boycott or other civil rights actions it inspired? What lessons from Rosa Parks' courage do you think young people today need to hear?